Your operating system is about to become a legal problem. Not in 5 years, not in some distant hypothetical future, in a few months from now. And almost nobody outside a small corner of the tech world is talking about it. There is a law sitting on the books in California right now. Signed. Final. Counting down to the day it takes effect. And when that day comes, the operating system you have been running for years could quietly slip into a legal gray zone you never asked to be in. You did not break any rule. You did not download anything illegal. You did not visit a single wrong site. You just made one choice that millions of people make every day. You chose to run Linux. And that choice is about to get complicated. The most unsettling part? This law was written to protect children. Picture this. You wake up on a Tuesday morning, you pour your coffee, you open your laptop, and the operating system you have been running for years, the one you trusted because it respected your privacy, has either added a feature you never asked for, blocked you from using it in your state entirely, or quietly gone non-compliant in ways that could expose you to legal risk you did not create. You did not download anything suspicious. You did not visit a single questionable site. You just run Linux. And somewhere in Sacramento, a bill that sounded like a victory for child safety just turned millions of users into a legal gray zone without firing a single bullet. If that sounds dramatic, stay with me. Because what I am about to walk you through is not a hypothetical horror story. It is real. It is signed, it is happening. And almost nobody outside the Linux community is paying attention to who it is going to break. I'm talking about Linux users. People who built their entire computing life around transparency, user control, and the radical idea that your machine should answer to you and not to a corporation. The exact people who have taken privacy more seriously than anyone else for decades. And the law in the books right now might accidentally crush them. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how a system designed to protect kids could quietly turn into a problem for the people most committed to digital freedom, and why this story is only the beginning. Let us start with the law itself. In October 2025, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed Assembly Bill 1043, the Digital Age Assurance Act. It was authored by Assembly Member Buffy Wicks and Senator Tom Umberg. It passed unanimously, 76-0 in the Assembly, 38-0 in the Senate. Google and Meta backed it publicly, and the law takes effect on January 1st, 2027. What does it actually require? Every operating system distributor that operates in California must collect a user's age at account setup. The user has to indicate their birth date, age, or both on what the law calls an accessible interface during account creation. Then the operating system must transmit an age bracket signal in real time through an application programming interface to any app developer that requests it. The brackets are under 13, ages 13 to 15, ages 16 to 17, and 18 and over. The goal is sensible enough on paper. The legislature wanted to stop kids from being exposed to harmful content, cyberbullying, sextortion, and a mental health crisis that is genuinely devastating young people. So instead of asking every individual app or website to verify ages, the law shifts that responsibility down to the operating system. One layer of verification. Everyone above it gets to query it. Clean, centralized, efficient. For Apple, Microsoft, and Google, this is fine. They already have user accounts. They already collect dates of birth. They already run app stores with real-time application programming interfaces. They have legal teams, compliance departments, and the infrastructure to push an update to every device by January 2027. Now apply that same requirement to Linux. There is no Linux account system. There is no centralized authority. There is no single company that ships Linux. Debian is run by roughly 1,000 volunteer developers spread across the world. Arch Linux has a maintainer team, but no commercial entity standing behind it. Fedora has Red Hat, sure, but Fedora itself is community-driven. Gentoo, Slackware, Void, NixOS, Alpine, the list goes on. None of these have a budget that could pay for a single compliance lawyer's retainer. And yet, under the original text of Assembly Bill 1043, all of them are potentially subject to the same requirements as Apple and Google. The law defines an operating system provider as anyone who develops, licenses, or controls operating system software on a computer, mobile device, or any other general-purpose computing device. Read that language carefully. It is broad enough to cover every Linux distribution that has California users, which is to say, all of them. This is not a thought experiment. The consequences have already started. Midnight BSD, an open-source operating system based on FreeBSD, announced in early 2026 that it would modify its license to exclude California residents from desktop use entirely, effective January 1, 2027. The reasoning was blunt. A volunteer project with no budget and no legal team cannot afford the risk of massive fines. So, rather than build age-tracking infrastructure it could not afford, Midnight BSD chose to bar an entire state from using its software. Let that sink in. An open-source operating system has decided that the cleanest legal path is to ban one of the largest economies in the world from running its code. It gets stranger. A developer named Dylan Taylor opened a pull request on Systemd, which is the init system that boots and manages services on most major Linux distributions. The pull request added a birthdate field, explicitly citing Assembly Bill 1043 and the parallel Colorado bill. The pull request received 945 comments. The maintainers received death threats. A privacy fork was launched in response. And on March 18, 2026, the maintainers merged it anyway. A field for a user's birth date now lives in the init system that runs underneath your Linux desktop. Not because anyone in the Linux community wanted it, because a state law made it the path of least resistance. This is what compliance pressure looks like when it hits open source. It does not arrive as a court order. It arrives as a quiet patch in a critical piece of infrastructure. It arrives as a project pulling out of a market. It arrives as maintainers spending their volunteer hours fighting about whether to comply with laws they were never consulted on. California is not alone. Colorado passed Senate Bill 26051 with similar age verification requirements for operating systems. According to System 76 founder Carl Ritchell, the Colorado bill includes exemptions for open-source operating systems, applications, code repositories, and containers. That is meaningful, and it is the result of community advocacy. But it also reveals the pattern. Each state is writing its own version of this law. Each one has slightly different definitions, slightly different carve-outs, slightly different obligations. At least 25 U.S. states have now passed some form of age verification legislation. West Virginia has a law taking effect soon. And federal proposals are circulating that would extend operating system-level age verification nationwide. This is the patchwork problems that federal privacy legislation was supposed to solve. Instead, we are watching it accelerate. Now let us look across the Atlantic, because Europe has been wrestling with a structurally identical issue. The European Union's Cyber Resilience Act, the CRA, was proposed in September 2022 and entered into force after years of intense debate. The CRA imposes mandatory cybersecurity requirements on hardware and software products sold in the EU. Manufacturers must produce a software bill of materials. They must report exploited vulnerabilities within strict timeframes. They must keep their products in conformity with essential security requirements for the expected product lifetime or 5 years, whichever is shorter. When the CRA was first drafted, the open-source community raised the alarm. The text as written threatened to make individual maintainers legally liable for vulnerabilities in code they had released for free. The pushback was massive and coordinated. The Linux Foundation engaged. The Open Source Initiative engaged. Developers across Europe wrote to their members of European Parliament. The result was a carve-out. The final text exempts free and open-source software developed or supplied outside the course of a commercial activity. A new category called Open Source Software Steward was created for legal entities, often foundations, that provide sustained support for open-source projects. Stewards have lighter obligations than commercial manufacturers. That is a real win. But it is also a narrow one. The moment open-source code is integrated into a commercial product, the manufacturer of that product is fully responsible under the CRA, which means that if you are a small business in Europe running a Linux-based service that touches user data, the carve-out does not protect you. You are not a developer contributing to open source. You are a data processor using software. And data processors are exactly who these laws are designed to regulate. The CRA is a preview of what is coming in the United States. American regulators have been watching how Europe handled the open source question. Whatever Europe codifies, expect to see echoed in American legislation within the next legislative cycle. So where does this leave us right now? The California legislature, to its credit, has noticed the problem. Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, the same person who authored Assembly Bill 1043, introduced Assembly Bill 1856 in February 2026. Assembly Bill 1856 is an amendment that would narrow the definition of operating system provider to exclude open source operating systems. If it passes before January 2027, Linux distributions, FreeBSD, and other open source systems would not be required to implement age verification at installation or first launch. That is good news. It is also conditional. Assembly Bill 1856 has not yet been signed into law. Whether it passes before the Assembly Bill 1043 deadline is genuinely uncertain. And even if it does, the carve-out is being written to exclude operating systems distributed under licenses that allow users to copy, redistribute, and modify the code. The question of what happens to commercially supported Linux, to Steam Deck running SteamOS, to enterprise distributions with paid support contracts remains unsettled. Valve's Steam Deck is the most public example of this ambiguity. SteamOS is technically open source. It runs a Linux kernel, but it ships bundled with the proprietary Steam client, which functions as a commercial application storefront. Under both the California and Colorado laws, the relevant question is whether the platform operates a covered application store. Valve may still be subject to age verification requirements even though the underlying operating system is open source. That is the legal gray zone the open source community is now living in. And it is not theoretical. It is here. So what do you actually do with this? The first thing is to pay attention to what your state legislature is doing. These laws are spreading faster than the open source community can respond to them. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has been actively criticizing Assembly Bill 1043, arguing that it shifts censorship responsibilities to app developers and entrenches the dominance of major operating system and device makers. Their analysis is publicly available and worth reading. The second thing is to support the organizations that are doing the policy work. The Linux Foundation has a policy engagement arm. The Open Source Initiative has been engaged on these debates. The Software Freedom Conservancy is fighting fights that directly affect your ability to use open source software legally and safely. These organizations need voices, they need funding, and they need people who actually understand the technology to show up in spaces where policy is made. The third thing is to contact your elected representatives with technical specificity. Most state legislators writing these bills have never configured a Linux system. They do not understand what a distribution is, what a package manager does, or why saying the operating system provider is responsible for compliance is incoherent when applied to a community project run by volunteers in 12 countries. You have technical knowledge that they do not. Use it in a letter, in a meeting, in a public comment. The fourth thing is to recognize that this is not a partisan issue. Assembly Bill 1043 passed unanimously in California. The Colorado bill cleared with bipartisan support. Open source compliance challenges are not coming from one side of the political spectrum. They are coming from a regulatory mental model that assumes all software has a corporate owner. Fixing that mental model is going to require sustained engagement from across the political spectrum. Here's the big picture. Protecting children online is a legitimate goal. Real, meaningful regulation of platforms that harm young people is something the United States genuinely needs. The companies that have been monetizing children's attention at industrial scale deserve to be held accountable. None of that is wrong. But good intentions written into laws that assume a corporate software model cause real damage to everything outside that model. And the framework being built right now, state by state, bill by bill, creates a world where using open source software, running your own infrastructure, caring enough about transparency to build your own system, becomes a compliance liability, where the most privacy-respecting users in the country end up regulated while the biggest data collectors in history get to certify themselves as clean. That is not a paranoid prediction. That is what is already happening. Right now, in real time, in 2 states, With more coming, the people building Linux are not the villains of this story. The platforms that made age verification feel necessary in the first place are. But the law does not always know the difference between the two. And if we do not make sure it does, the tool that most reliably respects user freedom will be the one the law treats as a problem. If this video helped you see something you did not see before, hit the like button. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the conversations happening at the intersection of technology, law, and the future of personal computing. And drop a comment below telling me whether you think open source has a realistic path through what is coming, or whether the regulatory tide is too strong to swim against. I read every single one. See you in the next one.